I thought maybe you had something you were planning today.
I have to do this in seconds.
This is the day of no planning. Okay.
Helping out.
There you go. You helped.
And I walked out again and
There's something with their system that is conducive to
And he told you directly.
No, indirectly.
Oh, that was more gentle.
He had knives in his hand.
And said, you really need to go outside.
I'm fine.
I'm fine. Why don't you wash the dishes?
That's not so indirect. Fairly directly.
I know.
Sorry? He worked his 16th birthday today.
So you're doing your business, right?
What's her name? Well, I know someone had one this was
Yeah, my son didn't get the car. I know, and we've been looking though. And then the other one is buy a car for like $15. Yeah. My son was like, when you went to
Right.
The saying with
I mean, it's got nice
No, there was nobody sitting there, but I was trying to speak over.
This is the morning you look around and you know all the kids, but you don't know their parents. Who are these people?
I'm sure that's big.
the big kids.
The big kids. I don't know the big kids. I don't even know you.
I think
Yeah, share that segment.
but they were there. Those guys were there already.
Just if it's somebody that put a piece of tape on it, you know why? Because the year was wrong and they couldn't figure out how to change it.
That's how I do it. I just cover it with
Duct tape.
You put a little piece of tape on and you write the year on it, the actual one.
Was that through your office?
Well, it was just interesting that the year was a total off, but the month was correct. So the month is all you really need, so you get the days and Tuesday's where it's supposed to be.
It was the day of the week.
It doesn't matter.
So it would say.
Whatever you do, you get comfy.
So the year's only wrong every year. So you just keep taking the tape off and putting another tape up in front of it. Very complex to change it. We can't figure it out.
That's it, he's just got
Just try the,
You can't sit there straight. That's why it's
screwdriver. It needs a hammer.
I dare you to episode again. I think I'll abandon it.
You're supposed to be doing this, huh?
You created enough disruption.
What's wrong with him? Good morning. Hope your meditation was good. And so, good enough. It's always good enough by definition. We have maybe 45 minutes to talk about
Can you change the,
Camera, they want it moved like.
which way?
Looks fine to me.
Okay.
You
Looks
move.
fine to me.
What did you want?
Well, where's your gesture? Well, someone was saying they couldn't see you, but
Oh, we
I see you very well now,
Okay.
and no Bill or Dora.
Where's the pity?
Maybe they want
Sorry about that.
Dora's niece.
You're very photogenic.
Piece of tape.
Sorry about that.
Really?
We need a little hood for the. So we have about 45 minutes to entertain ourselves with questions and to discover anything that we can about the Dharma. And following that, a short break. And then we have our not annual, though it would be nice if it was annual, welcome for children. Was originally thought of as a welcome for infants, to kind of include all ages. And it still is, I think, it would be nice if we moved more and more in the direction of doing it annually, but somehow we don't get around to it. Maybe we will in the future. So if you've come with kids and are staying for that, that's wonderful. And it won't last long. We'll be done by 11:30, I think, easily. And if you didn't know that that's what was happening, stay anyway. It'll be enjoyable. It's a simple ceremony. So, what's on your mind?
A simple question. The text for Saturday night's talk on the emotion, I'm talking about the upcoming visit of
Rinpoche's, yeah.
Right. And which of the books would you recommend as sort of a text for the union of relative and ultimate? Is there one of the books that you would recommend that he's written on that would refer to that subject more?
The confusion arises as wisdom, or confusion dawns as wisdom. I've forgotten which is. Arises. Confusion arises.
Yeah, unless there's a new edition this week.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you read this one?
Like
This is-
dreams
What's
and
the title?
Like Dreams and Clouds, Emptiness and Interdependence, Mahamudra and Doja.
Oh,
Dzogchen. I have-
sounds good.
It's a lot thinner.
Better get busy.
You should go for that then. I'm
Yeah.
sure it would support
Yeah.
the, that's gonna support the
Yeah.
ultimate
Yeah.
side of the relative and ultimate.
Yeah.
There are some specific things in Confusion Arises as Wisdom that are where I found particular passages that were particular to the union of the loving kindness, compassion, and the wisdom side. But I think, as I said, pretty much all the Dharma is talking about this one way or another. So I think here you have it, and you said it's thinner, and I think actually I have occasionally people have asked me, what book should I read about Mahamudra? And I said, well, find one that's no thicker than about that.
Yeah.
And there is something about it, it's not just a funny thing to say, that it is, if you can find something that's well written, that's short, you're more likely to kind of hit some key principles, have something kind of connect. The ones that have, 4,000 quotations from people tend to be a little bit harder to pull back into the fundamental simplicity.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Is it okay to go like random as all that get out right now? Okay.
Yeah.
So
It's inevitable.
since no one else brought up anything like relevant, pertinent, I have been thinking lately about what does the Dharma say about devotion versus possessiveness in relation to relationships. So as a young adult, we might call it monogamy versus polyamory, if you know those terms.
We're too old for that.
That was invented after our.
No, you forget the 60s.
Oh, yeah.
Anything else you'd like to ask?
Moving right along. Big bench.
It's all suffering.
Multiple ways, yeah.
So why don't you elaborate a tad?
Sure. So in thinking about like the way that we typically partner in America right now, the conventional is to commit to one person, to be devoted to that person,
Yeah.
which the other side of that can be to own that person, right? The woman takes the man's name, for an example.
Yeah.
Traditionally.
Yep.
And so the other, or one of the other options is to say love is boundless, you can be devoted without possessing, looking at attachment and I mean, I guess I have too many questions to be, it's just a very general question. I'm not asking about anything in particular, but just curious about what the Dharma might have to say about that aspect of romantic partnerships and the value of devoting and committing and partnering and possessing one person versus anything else, really.
That's quite a broad swath.
Yeah, just curious.
ask you a question?
Sure.
What would you like me to say?
Well, even if you just ask more questions, that I'm just, there's a lot of places in thinking about all that stuff that I get snagged on, and there's a lot of triggers, right? And so
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, where to shine the light in the distance. Like, what is the most loving path through all of that?
Yeah. Well, you raised a number of things which we could say are in some way basically the same. And if I take the last thing, how do you navigate through, and I put it into my own terms, I would say it would be how do you develop an understanding of kindness, loving kindness, compassion, such that you can navigate through the shoals of life, kind of in your relationships with others and with yourself and all of that. Then if we could think that that's really kind of could encompass what you're talking about. The issue, for example, of sharing or not sharing names in a relationship, I have to say, best just look at that as 100% cultural. What's true today, you could guarantee that in 100 years, it'll totally not be true. Now, 500 years ago, you might not have been able to say that with such certainty, but today, I think you could say it with absolute certainty, it'll be unrecognizable. But it will still be true that the confusion that people work with around these things will still be there. 1,000 years, just put it out as far as you want. The only thing you don't know is what it looks like at that time, what the details are. And the details we think are what get us. But you raise the issue of attachment. And you could also summarize your whole thing to the issue of what is the role of attachment? And in a more complete way, you might say the role of attachment and aversion. So those are kind of the black and white of a black and white image. The image changes continuously depending upon the intensity and the focus of our attachments and our aversions. And as Buddhists, we often say these are the ingredients. Like if you're going to bake a cake, you have to have certain ingredients. If you're going to suffer, you have to have certain ingredients. So normally we talk about it the other way because nobody wants to suffer. But in this case, unlike the cake where you could have the ingredients and just never bake the cake, once you have attachment and aversion, the cake is baked. and you are on your way to more suffering and continually thinking it's the cake, when actually it's not. You didn't even eat the cake. So, I guess in my own mind, what I want to say is most of the things that you mentioned as concerns are actually irrelevant. The relevant thing is, can you open your heart to the diversity of human beings and personalities and spiritual traditions and, the warring classes and the peaceful classes and all? Can you open your heart to that whole broad swath? If the answer is yes, then you already know you're happy. There's a sense of peace in it. It doesn't mean that the world isn't troubled or that we're not troubled individually, but we can experience that trouble within the context of something other than strife. And the rest of it, how do we navigate our human relationships? It's like samsara, that's the most important thing. How do we navigate our human relationships? I always like to say it jokingly, though almost nobody takes it as a joke. Our greatest happiness in samsara is our human relationships, and likewise our greatest misery. Now, I think we should all laugh uproariously because we all know that that's true. You know, the reason we don't is because we know it's true, and we've been caught in it. And it's kind of like walking out into a wet swamp, and you have no idea where it's deep and where it's shallow, and then suddenly you're over your head, and you don't know how to get out. And now, if that's the purview of the entire Dharma, like, how do I get out of the causes of suffering? And part of it is pay attention to the welfare of others. The details actually don't matter. They'll manifest, and we'll think they matter, but actually they don't. If we have, we were just talking about this morning with kids upstairs, a very pure relationship with it. Like the more you can care about others, the happier you are. And then comments come like, I'm already happy because I care about others. So that will get more complex, of course. And we will lose sight of that original clear insight that it really comes down to this thing. Can I care about those that are not easy to care about? You can't be happy while we make others miserable, and we can't not be happy when we make others peaceful and happy. And you can take that as a kind of model for all the pieces that you put there. I think it's just true, generally speaking. And we can add on to it things like great insight, full realization, all of these things. And those of us who have met people who have very high realization, it makes you happy to see them. You're happy to see them, you want to spend time with them, and you want that. And of course, then you leave, because that's the nature of this world, is that even if you stay with them a long time, they die in the end anyway. So it still comes back to you must continually, ideally, moment by moment, renew that sense and that understanding. And just keep at it all the time. And then the relationships are better. Well, the best relationships are the thin ones. They're the ones that are not really deep. You know, it's the person you met on the street who was unhappy, and it was really easy to make them happy. But actually, that's just a subset of the larger thing. Working with people who we know really well, it's really not any different. And so. Sometimes we talk about how important it is to practice the Dharma day and night, all the time. But most of the texts that we are fond of, somewhere in there will have that injunction. Like, you need to do this like day and night, in your dreams, when you're awake, when you're asleep, all the time. And of course that's really difficult. But it's easier to make a shot at that when the practice is so simple that you never have to ask the question, how do I do this? And if you engage it enough, of course, what was complex becomes simple. But from the beginning, it's just a lot easier to do if it's just simple. When I'm unhappy, I see that I'm looking after myself. When I'm happy, I see that I'm surrounded by people who care about me and I care about them. And so okay, is that all right?
think you answered my question with your last few sentences, but what came up for me when you said about making other people happy, it's like, I can't make somebody else happy. They have to find the happiness themselves. So I think just from my old conditioning as trying to make somebody happy was just going down the wrong path.
Didn't work?
It didn't work, no.
You didn't have a big enough stick.
So I think what, the last couple sentences you said were about you have to find your own happiness, and from that, you know how to help others. I mean, that's what we're striving for, is that ultimate wisdom, so that we actually know how to help other people's happiness. But sometimes I think, well, I know I used to get caught up with trying to make people happy and was using the wrong approach.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we all know that's the case. You can't make somebody happy, and usually they resent the effort. So it's rare that something like that works. On the other hand, what we can do is we can explore our own mind and discover the sense of quietude and peace in there, and then we can manifest that. And by make happy here, what I really mean is like, due to the truth of interconnectedness, certain things are inevitable when they come together. So when you meet someone who is genuinely happy, virtually unmovable in that place, others are magnetized by that. So they just naturally feel it. You can't make them happy, that is true. It's not a bad use of words, really. But you can influence. Now let's just change that slightly. It's impossible to not influence everyone you touch every time you see them. So if you are carrying that understanding, that sense of quietude, that sense of loving kindness for others, sense of peace and loving kindness for oneself, and that can all come from a very simple principle, right? Like, it doesn't need to be complex. Then people will find that having spent time with you is helpful, and then unfortunately they'll want to spend more time. Then we're back to attachment and aversion. It's like, stimulus for the infrastructure is needed. When it's shallow, it can work very well. And when it's really deep, it inevitably works really well. And along the way is our path, which is fraught with potholes and broken things. And we get caught when we are with someone who's suffering, and we feel, due to our connection, that our presence has had an impact, and we get caught by thinking that it'll just always be like that. It's also really helpful to develop an appreciation, like we do for certain strong foods, like spicy foods and strong tastes. Some of the times we can develop an appreciation for those things. If we can develop an appreciation for seeing our own suffering and its causes and the way in which we set the stage for that, just an appreciation for it rather than an aversion, an appreciation where we actually can look at it directly and feel good about seeing it rather than feeling bad about having it, rather than feeling bad about being angry or feeling bad because somebody said something to us or whatever. We can appreciate looking at that experience, and just that. that kind of thing can be really, really helpful. And others experience that too. It's helpful when we hit the potholes. We might have a slight sense of humor. There's another one of those.
Michael,
Yeah, Bill, yeah.
you said something about it, like the details don't matter, and I was like, well, it's interesting. It's kind of like, on one hand, I got kind of an impression, but then I'm also thinking that everything happens in the details,
Yeah.
whether it's either the devil or the bodhisattva is in the details.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could kind of tease apart the aspect where the details really are the only important thing versus, like, don't get hung up on the details.
How do you love the devil?
Because I think within your question, there's something that is a very particular question that is relevant at the moment. People are actually using those terms as opposed to some other terms.
Yeah.
I was thinking, you could also frame that, should I restrain my carnal desires or should I philander? And that would be, in another time and place, that would be how that.
So there's a word our generation.
No, that was the 50s. 60s, that fell apart.
Free love, baby.
So I'm just wondering if you could follow that a little bit, the aspect of the details do matter versus whatnot, because don't get hung up in this part of it.
Yeah. As when I said that, what I was thinking was, I was thinking of a specific example, like in the mind training tradition, you learn relatively simple to understand methods for dealing with a whole range of things. And the method is simple, which is a little bit belies the difficulty sometimes in actually doing it. But the principle that's embodied in those aphorisms can be applied to so many different things. And that's what I was thinking of as the details. That if you've got the principle, you could spend, let's just take a number, an hour a day out in the world, walking around, engaging that principle. And who you met would be a detail, and what you said would be a detail. But you could easily see that you were engaging it, or you weren't engaging it, or you were distracted, or you weren't. It's kind of like a puzzle game, I guess, in a certain way. Like there's the plain board and the rules for doing it, and the details can be terrible if you're a bad loser in the game. But if actually just enjoy the game, then the details don't matter so much. So that's where my thought was coming from. Tomorrow I'd say something totally different.
Hi. I have very little time and I tend not to read as much as I should. So I'm wondering, and I feel like I'm not very well advanced in understanding Mahamudra or Mahayana or
All those mahas.
Vajrayana, yeah, yana yana.
The wheels.
Yada
The
yada.
manana.
be able to get some benefit, am I gonna waste I hope I'm not wasting my time by going and seeing, Rinkotoku.
No,
You hope you're not wasting your time.
I just don't wanna, we're wasting the space with me in it.
To see Ringo Toko.
Right. That might be an interesting question to put in front of him. Would you like me to ask him for you?
I trust you guys.
I trust that he will not think that it's a waste of space, and
Okay.
especially that woman sitting in the third row. I mean, this is not about other people. What we find in our practice is we have relationships with other people, but our attachments, our aversions, our confusion, we carry to those places. It doesn't come from them.
Right.
So if you can sit and enjoy the presence of Rinpoche without getting in a chain of personal judgments and things, then that's pretty good. And I think we all have something we're working on. You know, that's kind of the natural diversity of things. So one person sits and wonders whether or not they're wasting a seat by sitting in it, and another person wonders why the teacher's not answering their questions as they put it there, and someone else is thinking they'll never get it, maybe they should just leave. And I mean, this is just the way it is. There's nothing special about it on the one hand, right? But of course, since it's my problem, it's very special. So this is what we need to we just keep an eye on this thing and work to give the judgments and the opinions up about our state of mind and come to the place of enjoying just seeing the state of mind. So if I feel like I shouldn't be here, then I notice that I feel I shouldn't be here. Now if I could just like keep my eye on that and not worry about it, I'll have an opinion tomorrow about it, you know, or a judgment tomorrow about it. But today I'm on vacation, so no, none of that. If you could do that, it would be an enormous benefit. I mean, it would just be really big. And it sounds so simple that you have to believe that it is simple. And then start working on it. Like when I see the disappointment or the judgment, there it is. We just train ourselves. There it is. I see you. I see what you're doing. I don't care. Go ahead. You know? You know, just have a heart to heart with it. You know? It's like, there's no one in this room who shares precisely the obstacle or the state of mind that somebody else has. So in a certain way, we might say, nobody actually cares. When we sit and judge ourselves and get upset, it's like there's nobody else who's actually thinking like, well, it's about time they saw what their judgments were doing. It's like, it just isn't there. And so that's the upside and the downside, because in some weird way, sometimes we want someone to be there to share our negative judgment about us, because at least it confirms something. But we don't want to confirm that. We want to confirm our inherent worthiness around this, no matter what we've done or haven't done in our entire life or all of our lives, that we carry an inherent worthiness for this. That's what we want to confirm. That opinion is helpful. And if it gives a little bit of an ego thing, and we can work on that later.
Thank you.
And could I also say, he doesn't call himself the lazy Lama for nothing. I mean, he really is laid back.
I think he does it for, that's what nothing means. I think he does it for nothing, actually. Sorry. I can't quite see you.
Yeah, I had a kind of a crazy experience yesterday where, well, I don't wanna go into a ton of details, but I ended up, some woman was in trouble and I ended up spending a lot of time with her, a stranger. I put gas in her car, I took her to Fred Meyer, bought her groceries and gave her money, and she had a crazy story, and she was very appreciative, hugging and
I don't, actually.
But at the end of it, I expected to feel really great, but I felt very confused and freaked out and then a lot of anxiety, and I was like, wait, but aren't I supposed to feel better about
What did you just say?
Aren't I supposed to feel better?
Am I supposed to feel better? Is that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
she
that's what I
expected
said.
to feel better.
Oh, I say.
Yeah, so I just felt, I thought doing things was supposed to, for other people were, you're supposed to feel good, but I didn't. I mean, I did, there was a lot of stuff came up, and so it
Yeah.
was very confusing, so I'm like, maybe I don't wanna do that anymore, Does that make sense?
Are you getting clarity?
What was that?
Are you getting clarity? That was not clear. So-
No, I'm not getting clarity.
No, I appreciate, this is really to my point, so can I just be more clear about this? Because when you say keep the superficial people will be easy to do, and it's not. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about, because I definitely am out there in that way too. And just to feel you're doing that, it's like, it's not easy. So help
Not
me.
easy to do what?
It's not easy with those superficial people to feel like you're doing them good.
Yeah, that's really true.
But what you just said is that it's easier with the superficial and it's not so easy with the people that you have deep relationships with.
I'm not sure that's exactly what I said,
Well,
but,
that's how I heard what you said.
because I agree with you.
You agree with what?
I agree with what you just said. I think it's generally not easy to work with other people. That's why we have the Dharma. It's just generally not easy. And we sometimes feel like it's easy because from one moment to the next, it's like a cloud in the sky. Sometimes it looks like a dog and sometimes like a dinosaur. And we don't get an awful lot of control over that, especially with clouds, but with other people too who are kind of like clouds in that way. It's very difficult. I think that the easy thing is when we have a fundamental, and this was what I was trying to work with, we have a fundamental understanding of a simple practice. So not a superficial practice, just a simple practice, like it's very clear to us, such that we can implement it in the great majority of circumstances that we find ourselves in. And that's where I think the 7-point mind training kind of excels, in fact. Like with very straightforward, not so difficult to understand, not to say it's easy to implement, but it's easy to understand what it is that we are meant to do in that practice.
Can you speak a little to Shelley's?
What?
Can you speak a little
wait.
to Shelley?
It is past 11.
Yes.
it's worth.
Well, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
What was your practice in that situation? Not what you think you should have had, what did you actually have?
What do you mean? I don't understand.
Well, like were you so you, I wouldn't ask this of someone who had no Dharma practice,
Yeah.
and you have quite a bit.
Uh-huh.
And so then I wonder, did you manage to carry some of your practice into that situation?
Yeah, I think I did. Yeah.
And so to the degree that you did, was that helpful?
Yes. Yes, it was.
Would you do more if you could?
More of the helping?
I don't mean, I mean it's like, here's where I gotta say that the details look like the difficulty, like the woman that you met looks
Yeah.
like that's the difficulty, and one might even say, I'm not saying you would, but somebody might say, I wished that I could have practiced there, but that person was too difficult, like they were difficult.
Mm.
And there I think if we can come back to our fundamental basic understanding of what it is that we're doing, and that we're working with a practice that kind of fits that model, then it's fairly, we're far more likely when the situation begins to get a little tense or a little confused, we're far more likely to reach for that because it's the only tool in the bag. Or you've got 2 or 3 tools, but you got 50 tools if you try to like get on with all of the 50 or 60 aphorisms. The result of that is we don't do any of them because we're in the midst of confusion and we don't actually know what to reach for. But when there's only one that we're working with this week, then we only have one to reach for. And in fact, we can just always have it in our hand.
Right.
So I was asking, what in that context were you doing? How did it work for you? Let us assume for a moment, this is a wonderful assumption, really. Let us assume for a moment that that woman was a fully realized bodhisattva. In other words, from the Mahayana and Vajrayana perspective, this person appeared for your benefit. Did you catch it?
There was a time, a little bit. I have to say a little bit I did. It almost kind of felt like that, a little bit.
Can happen. You know, you don't have to have be the Buddha to have that experience that someone appeared, and you don't have to ask the question, is it true or not? Are they really a bodhisattva? Did they really do that for me? That is not the game. That's another game. That really is the game of confusion. But as a view to hold, what people bring me today, I will treat as a gift intentionally delivered by someone who knows. And if you can hold that during the day, everybody and every circumstance you meet becomes part of your practice. If you get even just one shot at that in a day, it's like it turns things. So if you got some, I would say that's not, I wouldn't avoid acknowledging that, thinking like, well, that's arrogant to think that. No, we need to be honest from all perspectives, and one of them is, if we had the experience that a really difficult and confusing thing, in the midst of it I was confused, but as it passed and as it settled, my confusion turned into a sense of, that was a great encounter. That's precious. So I wouldn't discard it, and I would go looking for it. place here where we have to morph into children. And whether or not we do, they will arrive. They'll like us better if we are children. So let's dedicate the merit from this morning.
By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, we're having our children's welcoming this morning, and you're all welcome and encouraged to stay. It won't be very long. It's funny, I came this morning thinking, like, I can never do this twice in a row because there's always a mixture. The kids have ranged from 3 months old, approximately, all the way up to like 18. Yeah.
I have 2 months old. And Steve to deal with, so I don't know if we are interested.
Well, you know, we're going to get them to sing.
Oh,
Yeah, we're going to get them to sing.
very practicing.
We did already. We did that. Yeah.
I'm Mary Ann Jones. I'm a member at ASC and actually, I bring you greetings from everybody there. From my girlfriend.
So it looks, that's
Yeah, I think you want to reach out to him.